The moment I stepped onto Pine Island, I knew this summer would either make or break us. The salty breeze carried whispers of possibilities, but also the weight of unspoken truths that had been simmering beneath the surface of our friendship for far too long. My name is Claire, and this was supposed to be our last hurrah before college scattered us to the winds. Emma, Jake, and I had been inseparable since freshman year of high school, but as I watched them unload their bags from the rusty ferry, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all keeping secrets that threatened to unravel everything we'd built. Emma's fiery red hair whipped around her face as she squinted against the sun. "Can you believe we actually pulled this off?" she asked, her voice tinged with excitement and a hint of nervousness. Jake, ever the pragmatist, hefted his oversized backpack onto his broad shoulders. "Let's not celebrate yet. We still have to find this cabin and hope it's not a total dump." I forced a laugh, trying to dispel the tension that had been building in my chest since we'd made plans for this trip months ago. "Come on, guys. Where's your sense of adventure?" As we trudged up the winding path that led away from the small dock, I couldn't help but steal glances at Jake. His sandy blonde hair had grown longer since graduation, and a shadow of stubble darkened his jaw. He'd always been handsome, but something had shifted in the past year. The easy camaraderie we'd shared since we were 14 had become charged with an electricity I wasn't sure how to handle. Emma, oblivious to my inner turmoil, chattered away about her expectations for the summer. "I heard there's going to be a bonfire on the beach tonight. We should totally go." I nodded absently, my mind already racing ahead to the upcoming weeks. We had rented the cabin for 2 months, June and July, before we'd all head off to different colleges in August. It had seemed like a brilliant idea when we'd first hatched the plan, a way to hold on to our youth for just a little longer before real life came crashing down. Now, I wasn't so sure. The path opened up to reveal a cluster of quaint cabins nestled among towering pine trees. Ours was at the end of the row, its weathered blue paint peeling slightly around the edges. It wasn't exactly the luxury accommodation Emma had been hoping for, but it had a certain charm that made my heart skip a beat. "Home sweet home," Jake announced, fishing the keys out of his pocket. As he fumbled with the lock, I caught Emma giving me a pointed look. I knew what she was thinking. We'd had countless late-night conversations about my feelings for Jake, and she'd been urging me to confess for months. But how could I risk our friendship, especially now when everything was about to change? The door creaked open, revealing a cozy interior that smelled of pine and sea salt. It wasn't much: a small kitchen, a living area with a worn but comfortable-looking couch, and 2 bedrooms. But it was ours for the summer. "I called dibs on the room with the view," Emma declared, darting past us to claim her territory. Jake and I exchanged a glance, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker in his hazel eyes. But then he cleared his throat and said, "Guess that leaves us as roommates, Henderson. Try not to snore too loud." I rolled my eyes, ignoring the way my pulse quickened at the thought of sharing a room with him. "Please, we both know you're the snorer in this friendship." As we settled in, unpacking our belongings and arguing good-naturedly about who would take which drawer, I tried to shake off the feeling that we were all dancing around something bigger than ourselves. We'd been friends for so long, but there were moments when I looked at Jake or Emma and felt like I was seeing strangers. That night, we made our way down to the beach for the bonfire Emma had mentioned. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Other teenagers and young adults from nearby cabins had gathered around a roaring fire, the flames casting flickering shadows across laughing faces. "Now this is what I'm talking about," Emma exclaimed, twirling in the sand with her arms outstretched. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I felt some of my earlier anxiety begin to melt away. Jake produced a cooler from seemingly nowhere, popping the top off a beer and offering it to me. "Liquid courage?" he asked with a wink. I accepted the bottle, our fingers brushing for a moment longer than necessary. "Since when do I need liquid courage?" I retorted, taking a long swig to cover my nervousness. As the night wore on, we mingled with the other island visitors, sharing stories and dreams for the future. Emma, always the social butterfly, had soon gathered a small crowd around her as she regaled them with tales of our high school hijinks. I found myself drifting away from the group, drawn to the quiet darkness where the waves lapped gently at the shore. The beer had left me feeling warm and slightly buzzed, my inhibitions lowered just enough to let my guard down. Penny for your thoughts? Jake's voice startled me out of my reverie. I turned to find him standing closer than I'd expected, his familiar scent of soap and something uniquely Jake enveloping me. Just thinking about how much everything's going to change after this summer, I admitted. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, too. A comfortable silence fell between us, broken only by the distant laughter from the bonfire and the rhythmic sound of the waves. I gathered my courage, knowing that if I didn't say something now, I might never get the chance. Jake, Claire, there's something. We both spoke at the same time, then laughed awkwardly. You go first, I insisted, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Jake ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd always found endearing. I don't know how to say this without potentially ruining everything, but I can't go off to college without you knowing how I feel. My breath caught in my throat. Was this really happening? I've had feelings for you for a long time, Claire, he continued, his voice low and intense. More than just friendship. I think I'm in love with you. For a moment, I was paralyzed. Joy and fear warred within me as I processed his words. This was everything I'd ever wanted, but the timing couldn't have been worse. In 2 months, we'd be heading to colleges on opposite coasts. Jake, I began, but was cut off by a shrill scream from the direction of the bonfire. We both whirled around to see Emma stumbling away from the fire, her eyes wide with panic. Without thinking, Jake and I sprinted towards her. Emma, what's wrong? I called out as we approached. She was shaking, her face pale in the firelight. I thought I saw. What did you see? Jake pressed, his arm instinctively going around her shoulders. Emma took a shuddering breath. I thought I saw my dad. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Emma's father had passed away in a boating accident when we were sophomores. It had been a devastating loss that had brought our little trio even closer together. Oh, Emma, I murmured, pulling her into a tight hug. It's okay. You're okay. As we comforted our friend, the moment between Jake and me dissipated like smoke on the wind. But his confession echoed in my mind, a promise and a complication I wasn't sure how to handle. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of waves crashing against the shore and the soft snoring of Jake in the bed across the room. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a future where waking up to that sound was a daily occurrence. Then reality came crashing back, and I remembered the unfinished conversation from the night before. I slipped out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake Jake. The cabin was silent as I made my way to the kitchen, but I found Emma already there, nursing a cup of coffee and staring out the window with a pensive expression. Hey, I said softly, not wanting to startle her. How are you feeling? She turned to me with a wan smile. Better, I guess. God, I feel so stupid about last night. I poured myself a cup of coffee and joined her at the small kitchen table. You're not stupid, Em. Grief does weird things to us sometimes. Emma nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. I miss him so much, you know? And being here, surrounded by the ocean, it brings back a lot of memories. I reached out and squeezed her hand. I know, but you're not alone, okay? Jake and I are here for you. Always. At the mention of Jake's name, Emma's eyes sharpened. Speaking of Jake, what were you two talking about before my little meltdown? You looked pretty intense. I felt heat rise to my cheeks and busied myself with taking a long sip of coffee. Oh, it was nothing really. Claire Henderson, you are a terrible liar, Emma said, a hint of her usual spark returning. Spill. I sighed, knowing there was no point in trying to hide anything from Emma. She knew me too well. Jake told me he has feelings for me. That he thinks he's in love with me? Emma's eyes widened, and for a split second, I thought I saw something flicker across her face. Hurt? Jealousy? But it was gone so quickly I convinced myself I had imagined it. "Oh my God, Claire! That's huge!" she exclaimed. "What did you say?" "I didn't get a chance to say anything," I admitted. "That's when we heard you scream." Emma's face fell. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. I ruined your moment." I shook my head vehemently. "No, Em, you didn't ruin anything. You needed us, and that's what matters." She reached out and grabbed my hand. "But this is what you've wanted for so long. You have to talk to him. Tell him how you feel." I bit my lip, the doubts that had been plaguing me all night bubbling to the surface. "I don't know, Emma. We're about to go to colleges on opposite sides of the country. Is it really fair to start something now?" Emma's grip on my hand tightened. "Life isn't fair, Claire. But love? Love is always worth the risk." As if on cue, we heard the creak of a floorboard and turned to see Jake shuffling into the kitchen, his hair mussed from sleep and his eyes still heavy-lidded. "Morning," he mumbled, making a beeline for the coffee pot. Emma shot me a meaningful look before standing up. "I think I'm going to go for a walk on the beach, clear my head a bit." As she brushed past Jake, she paused to give his arm a squeeze. "Thanks for last night, both of you. I don't know what I'd do without you guys." And then she was gone, leaving Jake and me alone in the suddenly too small kitchen. So Jake poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, his eyes finding mine over the rim of his mug. "So, about last night." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was sure to be a difficult conversation. "Jake, But before I could continue, there was a loud knock at the door. We both jumped, startled by the unexpected intrusion. Jake set down his mug with a sigh. "I'll get it." I followed him to the door, curious about who could be visiting us so early in the morning. When Jake swung the door open, we were met with the sight of a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Good morning," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "I'm sorry to bother you folks so early, but I'm looking for Emma Carlson. I was told she might be staying here." Jake and I exchanged a worried glance. After Emma's scare the night before, a stranger asking for her set off alarm bells in my head. "Who's asking?" Jake said, his tone polite but guarded. The man's weathered face crinkled into a smile. "I'm sorry, where are my manners? My name is Robert Carlson. I'm Emma's uncle." My jaw dropped. In all the years I'd known Emma, she'd never once mentioned having an uncle. "I'm sorry," I said, finding my voice. "But Emma's never talked about an uncle before." Robert's smile faltered slightly. I'm not surprised. There's a lot of family history there. Is Emma here? I'd really like to speak with her if possible." Just then, we heard the back door open and close, followed by Emma's voice calling out, "Guys, you won't believe what I found on the beach." She rounded the corner, sand still clinging to her bare feet, and froze when she saw the man standing in our doorway. "Uncle Bob?" she whispered, her face draining of color. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake and I looked between Emma and her supposed uncle, trying to make sense of the situation. Robert took a tentative step forward. "Hello, Emma. It's been a long time." Emma's shock quickly morphed into anger. "What are you doing here? How did you even find me?" I've been trying to get in touch with you for months," Robert explained, his voice gentle. "When I heard you were spending the summer here on Pine Island, I knew I had to come." Emma's eyes flashed dangerously. "Why? Why now, after all these years?" I moved to Emma's side, placing a comforting hand on her arm. She was trembling, though whether from anger or fear, I couldn't tell. Robert sighed heavily. "There's so much I need to tell you, Emma. About your father, about our family, things you deserve to know." At the mention of her father, Emma's resolve seemed to crumble. She sagged against me, and I tightened my grip on her arm to keep her upright. Jake, ever the peacemaker, stepped in. "Why don't we all sit down? I think this is a conversation that needs to happen inside, not on our doorstep. Reluctantly, Emma nodded and we all moved into the living room. The cozy space that had felt so welcoming yesterday now seemed claustrophobic with the weight of unspoken truths hanging in the air. As we settled onto the worn couches, I couldn't help but feel like we were on the precipice of something monumental. The summer that was supposed to be about holding on to our youth and friendship had suddenly become so much more complicated. Robert cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on Emma. I know you probably have a lot of questions, and I promise I'll answer them all. But first, I need to tell you something important about your father. Emma's grip on my hand tightened. What about him? The accident that took his life. It wasn't an accident at all. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. Emma's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. What do you mean? She demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Your father was involved in something dangerous. He was trying to protect you and your mother, but it caught up with him in the end. I felt like I was watching a movie unfold, unable to reconcile this tale of danger and intrigue with the memories I had of Emma's kind, laughing father. You're lying, Emma said, but there was a tremor in her voice that betrayed her uncertainty. I wish I was, Robert replied softly. But it's time you knew the truth. Your father was working as an informant for the FBI, helping to bring down a major drug trafficking ring that was operating out of this very island. The revelation hit us all like a tidal wave. Jake, who had been silent up until now, let out a low whistle. Emma shook her head vehemently. No, no, no. My dad was a high school science teacher. He loved his job. He loved us. He couldn't. He did it for you, Emma, Robert insisted. He wanted to make the world a safer place for you to grow up in. But when the cartel found out he was working with the feds, they came after him. Tears were streaming down Emma's face now, and I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, trying to offer what little comfort I could. Why are you telling me this now? She choked out. Robert's expression softened. Because the case is finally closed. The last members of the cartel were arrested last month. It's safe for you to know the truth now, and I couldn't bear the thought of you going through life not knowing what a hero your father really was. Emma stood up abruptly, shaking off my comforting arm. I need some air. Without another word, she bolted out the front door, leaving us all staring after her in stunned silence. I made to follow her, but Jake caught my arm. Give her a minute, he said softly. This is a lot to process. Robert looked devastated. I'm sorry, he said, running a hand over his face. I didn't mean to drop all of this on her at once. I've been carrying this secret for so long. I turned to him, my mind reeling with questions. How do we know you're telling the truth? Do you have any proof? He nodded, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a worn envelope. I have copies of some of the case files and letters your father wrote to me before he died. I was his handler, you see, the one who recruited him for the FBI. Jake took the envelope, his brow furrowed as he began to leaf through the documents. I watched his eyes widen as he scanned the pages, and I knew that whatever was in those papers, it corroborated Robert's story. I think we should go find Emma, I said, my heart aching for my friend and the world-shattering revelations she was grappling with. Jake nodded, handing the documents back to Robert. You should probably stay here, he told the older man. I don't think Emma's ready to face you again just yet. Robert agreed reluctantly, and Jake and I headed out to search for our friend. We found her down on the beach, sitting in the sand with her knees pulled up to her chest, staring out at the ocean. I approached her cautiously, settling down beside her without a word. Jake took up position on her other side, and for a long moment we all just sat there in silence, watching the waves crash against the shore. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice hoarse. Did you know that my dad used to bring me here when I was little? We'd spend hours building sandcastles and collecting seashells. He always said the ocean was where he felt most at peace. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine what you're feeling right now. She turned to look at me, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. I don't know what to feel, Claire. Part of me wants to believe it's all a lie, that my uncle is crazy or confused. But another part of me always knew there was more to my dad's death than a simple boating accident. Jake leaned in, his shoulder brushing against Emma's. Your uncle showed us some documents. They seem pretty legit, Em. Emma nodded slowly. I know. I think I've always known deep down that there was more to the story. It's why I thought I saw him last night at the bonfire. Part of me has never been able to accept that he's really gone. I felt a lump form in my throat. Your dad was an amazing man, Emma. Whether he was a science teacher or a secret FBI informant, he loved you more than anything in the world. That much I know for sure. A ghost of a smile flickered across Emma's face. Yeah, he did. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. I think I'm ready to talk to my uncle now. I have so many questions. We made our way back to the cabin where Robert was waiting anxiously. The next few hours were a blur of stories, explanations, and tears as Emma learned the truth about her father's double life and the circumstances surrounding his death. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cabin's worn floorboards, I found myself stepping outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The events of the day had left me feeling emotionally drained, and I needed a moment to process everything. I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear Jake approach until he was standing right beside me. Hey, he said softly. How are you holding up? I let out a shaky laugh. Me? I'm not the one who just had my entire family history turned upside down. Jake nodded, his eyes serious. True, but you're allowed to be affected by this too, Claire. Emma's your best friend, and this is a lot for all of us to take in. I leaned against the porch railing, feeling the rough wood under my palms. I just keep thinking about how none of us really know what's going on in other people's lives. We think we know someone. And then life throws you a curveball. Jake finished for me. Our eyes met, and suddenly I was acutely aware of how close we were standing. The confession he'd made on the beach last night came rushing back to me, and I felt my heart rate quicken. Jake, about what you said last night. He held up a hand, cutting me off. You don't have to say anything, Claire. I know the timing is terrible with everything that's happening with Emma and us all heading off to college soon. I shouldn't have dumped that on you. I shook my head vehemently. No, Jake, you don't understand. But before I could finish my sentence, the cabin door swung open and Emma stepped out onto the porch. Her eyes were red and puffy, but there was a calmness about her that hadn't been there before. Hey guys, she said, her voice rough from crying. Can we talk? Jake and I exchanged a glance, our own drama once again put on hold in the face of our friend's need. Of course, I said, reaching out to pull Emma into a hug. Always. We settled onto the porch steps, the three of us pressed together like we used to do during late-night stargazing sessions in high school. Emma took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the darkening sky. I've decided to defer college for a year, she announced. Uncle Bob has offered to help me go through all of Dad's old case files, to really understand the work he was doing. I think I need to do this, to honor his memory and maybe find some closure. I felt a pang in my chest at the thought of Emma not joining us at college in the fall, but I understood her need for answers. We support you, Em. Whatever you need. Jake nodded in agreement. Yeah, and hey, Pine Island isn't that far from either of our schools. We can visit on weekends. Make sure you're not spending all your time buried in FBI files. Emma laughed, a genuine sound that lifted some of the heaviness from the air. Thanks, guys. I don't know what I'd do without you. As we sat there, the three of us united in the face of unexpected change, I realized that this summer had become about so much more than just holding on to our youth. It was about growth, about facing hard truths, and about the unbreakable bonds of friendship that could weather any storm. The next few weeks passed in a blur of emotional conversations, laughter, and tears. Emma spent a lot of time with her uncle, piecing together the puzzle of her father's secret life. Jake and I did our best to support her while also grappling with our own unresolved feelings. One evening, about a month into our stay, I found myself alone on the beach. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, reminding me of that first night when everything had started to change. I heard footsteps in the sand behind me and turned to see Jake approaching, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Hey," he said, settling down beside me. "Penny for your thoughts?" I couldn't help but smile at the echo of that night a month ago. Just thinking about how different everything is now, compared to what we expected when we planned this trip. Jake nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "Yeah, it's been one hell of a summer." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the waves lap at the shore. Finally, I gathered my courage and turned to face him. "Jake, I never got to respond to what you told me that night," I began, my heart pounding in my chest. He met my gaze, his expression a mix of hope and apprehension. "You don't have to, Claire. I meant what I said before, about the timing being all wrong." I shook my head, reaching out to take his hand. "The timing will always be wrong if we let it be. These past few weeks have taught me that life is unpredictable and short. We can't waste time being afraid of what might happen." Jake's eyes widened as he realized what I was saying. "Claire, are you—" I took a deep breath. "I love you too, Jake. I have for a long time. And maybe it's crazy to start something when we're about to go to colleges on opposite coasts, but I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering, what if?" For a moment, Jake just stared at me, and I felt a flicker of doubt. But then his face broke into a brilliant smile, and he pulled me into his arms. "God, Claire," he murmured into my hair. "I've waited so long to hear you say that." As we kissed, the setting sun warming our faces, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew we'd face them together. Later that night, as Jake, Emma, and I sat around a small bonfire on the beach, I looked at my two best friends and felt a surge of love and gratitude. This summer hadn't been anything like what we'd planned, but it had given us something far more valuable than a carefree last hurrah. It had given us truth, growth, and the courage to face an uncertain future with open hearts. As I snuggled closer to Jake, his arm warm around my shoulders, and watched Emma's face glow in the firelight as she shared another story about her dad, I knew that this truly was a summer we'd remember for the rest of our lives. The flames danced before us, casting flickering shadows on the sand, and I silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought us to this moment. Our lives were about to change dramatically. Emma with her quest for truth, Jake and I navigating a long-distance relationship, all of us stepping into adulthood. But the bonds we'd forged and strengthened on this little island would keep us anchored, no matter where life took us next. As the stars twinkled overhead and the sound of the waves provided a soothing backdrop, I realized that sometimes the most memorable summers are the ones that don't go according to plan. They're the ones that challenge us, change us, and ultimately make us who we're meant to be. If you enjoy heartwarming, inspirational Southern stories, then pick up a copy of Ernest Dempsey's latest novel, The Final Round, through the link in the description. And be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from Magnolia Crossing when they're uploaded. Thanks for watching.